a really kind of like nice, normal human being that obviously like understands that he has an amazing platform and he's using it, but he's also kind of like a genuinely nice person who gets it, who really kind of like pays attention. So it was like that was really reassuring that like there is someone like that in that role with that platform.
Now, Tony, you've co-authored books with King Charles. How was that? Was it hard giving him notes?
He gave me the notes. And so people sometimes ask, what did you influence the King on with that book? And my point is it's completely the opposite direction. That's his book. And Ian Skelly and I helped him with bringing notes to put into text and to prose, and help with some of the picture sourcing and putting it into a form that led to it being a book. But every single syllable in there is his.
Hello and welcome to our very first live episode of a Right Royal podcast.
We're so excited to be with you all here today at the beautiful Ladbroke Hall.
It's so special to be doing this in such an important week, so thank you all so much for coming.
Now, if you're a regular listener, you know we've been doing this for 3 years, so it's an absolute joy to be here with you today.
And if you're new, welcome. Today we're focusing on something we think is really important and maybe not talked about enough, which is the royal family's work on environmental issues.
Now, since this is our first live show, we would love to get you involved. So we will be asking a few questions in the next 40 minutes, and we would love to see a show of hands.
Okay, so I'm going to kick things off. Hands up if you've ever listened to the Right Royal podcast before.
Oh.
And hands up if you've listened from the beginning. Hey, look at that. We'll see you backstage for champagne in a bit. Yeah.
Now, hopefully by the end of the session, we have a few converts. Now, Emily, tell us why we have these two amazing guests with us today.
Well, as you know, Andrea, it's London Climate Action Week, and we're absolutely thrilled to be joined by Tony Juniper, veteran environmentalist, the chair of Natural England, and the author of multiple books, including 2 co-authored with the now King Charles III. And Pierre Paslier, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of Notpla. This is a fantastic sustainable packaging company which won Prince William's 2022 Earthshot Prize for Build a Waste-Free World. And I can tell you now that Pierre will be hot-footing it straight from here to an event with the Prince of Wales. So we're very grateful that he could squeeze us in today.
Right, let's get this started, shall we?
Let's do it.
Tony, Pierre, welcome. We're so thrilled to have you here. Here we are at London Climate Action Week. Can you sum up for us why this week is so important and why it is vital to be stepping out and having these conversations now?
Well, it's essential that we continue to draw attention to these issues, and not only the facts of what's going on, but also the urgency of doing something about it. And I think the more that we see from the scientists and the more we understand the scale of challenge that's upon us, every week now needs to be Climate Action Week. It's fantastic to have this moment where we really focus, but out of this, I think we really need to be putting the emphasis on the action bit of it, because we know a great deal about what's going on, the changing composition of the Earth's atmosphere. We understand the causes for that, and we can increasingly see the consequences. And 20 years ago, when you were thinking about climate change, you used to read a book. Today, all you need to do is step outside your front door.
Absolutely. Pierre?
Yeah, I think it's super exciting that compared to last year, London Climate Action Week is twice as big. There are so many people who've decided that this is kind of like a really good moment to come together and look 360, all the kind of like solutions, all of the mechanisms for financing, all of the kind of like stakeholders that can influence policy or just kind of like behavior are in town. And so it's a super shot for everyone to get kind of like into action.
Now, Tony, you've been a huge name in terms of the environment for the past 4 decades. You've worked very closely with King Charles. I want to take you back, however, to this day a fortnight ago when you and I were standing on the side of a peat bog in Dartmoor in biblical rain, waiting for the Prince of Wales to visit. It's not always as glamorous as it looks, is it, working with members of the royal family?
No, but the rain was very welcome, and it was a fantastic day, and it was wonderful to see Prince William's leadership on a key issue, which is about how we're going to achieve nature recovery in our crowded islands, at the same time as producing a lot of our own food from domestic sources. And the challenge on Dartmoor as it is across much of England, really comes down to how we align the nature recovery process with continuing to produce a lot of our own good quality food. And that's exactly what Prince William is leading there through the Dartmoor vision that was published that day. And Natural England's working very closely on the ground with the farmers, with a group of actors on Dartmoor who are looking at ways in which we can square off these complicated conundrums between the wildlife, the local economy, the food production, the water, the carbon that's in the soil. And we were standing, of course, next to an area of peat. So peat is a kind of soil that is accumulated plant remains that have been building up for thousands of years. And sadly, across much of the country, including on Dartmoor, that peat is becoming degraded and it's releasing carbon into the atmosphere at the same time as leading to the loss of key wildlife habitats. So restoring that peat is a key thing that we must do. And Prince William really gets that in his bringing people together across those vast duchy estates that exist on Dartmoor to be able to bring people together in common cause to achieve the outcomes that we all need. So it's wonderful to see him really engage with that. And the thing that he said to me there, which I get from him and also his father, is we really need to do things. We've got to get on with it and make a difference. And it was wonderful to see him leading from the front on that.
Now, these issues have been really interesting for you since you were a child, and you've gone on to have a remarkable career, something that is actually very similar to King Charles. He gave an incredible speech when he was just 21 years old in 1970 about plastic pollution, and he said at the time that people thought he was potty and dotty. You've said he's one of the most influential environmentalists of all time. Do you think he's getting the recognition that he deserves now?
He certainly deserves it, and I think that idea of seeing him as the most influential environmentalist, I think it is correct. If you look back to those early days in the 1970s, when these issues were really fringe, he really stuck with it. He read the science, he spoke to the experts, he formed opinions which were grounded on fact and evidence, and he put them out there, and he really was a lone voice in the establishment for sure in those days. There were a few environmental groups beginning to form around then. But in terms of people who had that kind of platform and that recognition, as someone who was very much at the heart of the British state and with an international profile, he was unique. And he got a lot of pushback. And he says himself, people said I was potty, and he got ridiculed. But that was something that never put him off. He stuck to his guns. He learnt more, he found out more, and then from those early days, he broadened his purview of knowledge, and he embraced the agenda of sustainable agriculture, the cause of the tropical rainforests, questions of water and food security, and then ultimately became a leading voice on the climate change question. And he's been really building momentum and impact ever since. And he has a very different role in life now, but he was with a meeting yesterday in Lancaster House with a group of leaders from finance and business, looking at how we can fund the transition, the kind of thing that Pierre was talking about in terms of how we align finance behind these big challenges. And he's right there in the crowd, speaking to everybody, giving his enthusiasm and backing, and so really still showing influence and leadership despite the constraints of his new role.
Tony, can I ask how you came to first work with the then Prince Charles?
So this goes back to my very early days when I joined Friends of the Earth in 1990 to lead the Tropical Rainforest campaign, and he helped us with a big event we did which was around the value of the forests intact rather than being turned into land on which we could grow soya beans or rear cattle. And he was very much making then the economic case for the rainforests and working with us as campaigners to be able to get the message across. And of course, with his voice, the message went very far and wide, including amongst businesses. And it's very interesting, actually, that 17 years after that, 2007, I left Friends of the Earth at that point and joined the Prince's Rainforests Project, which was his initiative to bring all of these different actors together, the countries, the scientists, the big commodity traders, the international organizations, to be working together to come up with a solution. And the slogan for that campaign, effectively, or that initiative, was to make the forests worth more alive than dead. And so he'd seen that the key failure was about the economic perspective we take and liquidating these critical ecosystems for global stability, for all sorts of reasons, food and water security amongst them. And he was seeking to find ways in which we could establish economic ideas that would see the forests as being kept intact as a more sensible economic choice than cutting them down, which is what sadly people are still doing in order to get timber or to open up land for mines or farms. But that economically is not rational. And he really got that and really landed that message. And in fact, a lot of that work finished up being reflected in the Paris Agreement on climate change, agreed in 2015. And it was the momentum of that work that brought all those people together that landed some of the key provisions in that treaty.
Wow. And Pierre, you're working with the air, I couldn't resist the rhyme, on something really incredible. So if anyone in the audience recently went to Beyonce, or we've got any footy fans in here, or anyone's heading off to Wimbledon, chances are you've come across Pierre's amazing Nopla packaging, which we have right here, actually.
Yeah.
Shall
We
we
can pass it round.
be our lovely assistant, Emily? Yeah, pass it round a little bit. Pierre, can you tell us a little bit about this, and also give us a little bit of context for what the Earthshot prize is?
Yeah, so we created at Notpla an alternative to single-use plastics using seaweed, a material that is like so abundant, fast-growing. Some species can grow up to 1 meter per day, and at the end of life, it's also natural and biodegradable. So compared to plastic that is really an indestructible, forever material, we think that there's lots of applications where actually, like, when you need to consume strawberries and cream for 15 minutes, you don't need to have a coating of plastic inside that cardboard container. And so excitingly, we've been able to bring this to now more than 50 stadiums. I think to date, we've replaced about 20 million single-use plastics with this seaweed technology. And we've been very lucky to win the Earthshot prize for Build a Waste-Free World category, which has been a huge acceleration point for us.
Wow, so we can really have our strawberries and cream guilt-free now.
Tony, you seem
Cool. This is really cool. This is exactly in the space we need to be, circular bioeconomy. And as Pierre is revealing with these products, this is perfectly possible to do. If we shift our mindset and start thinking about these broader issues and then reflect them into these kinds of innovations, it's all perfectly doable.
I wanted to ask you, actually, Pierre, because the Earthshot Prize, for anyone here who's not familiar with it, it's a £50 million 10-year programme to create the kind of Nobel Prize for the environment. And so it has 5 different categories. And it's really sort of putting these issues out there, isn't it? But in a way that we discussed earlier is really about bringing some hope and optimism, which is really important. And one thing that I have been told, have it on good authority, is that Prince William gets very excited about seaweed. Is that your doing?
Well, I think I contributed a little, but I mean, it's true. Like, it's amazing that he's really identified the potential of seaweed, not just for packaging, but like so many other things that we can like replace some petrochemicals. We can, like, seaweed is a great carbon sink. It's essential for reboosting the biodiversity in the oceans. And so there's lots of solutions from the Earthshot Prize that are kind of like linked to seaweed. There's a bit of a growing topic, so we are also leveraging each other's strength and expertise to actually create a healthier seaweed ecosystem with like investors who are a little bit kind of like dubious about this new kind of like very hard to understand like ecosystem. But now they are leaning in, they are understanding that this is a really important kind of like topic. And so I think like Prince William has become de facto the seaweed ambassador for kind of like this nascent kind of like ecosystem, and it's really, really exciting. And I think he really kind of like goes and like in contact with the actors on the field. So he went to visit a seaweed farm that we really like, Caamano in Wales, and he's really kind of like making sure that whatever roadblocks there are, they get removed. His convening power is leveraged for actually kind of accelerating the power of seaweed to replace a lot of like other problematic substances.
I was going to ask you, actually, because he has played quite a significant part in the role of Notpla now, both through the prize, but also through his love of football. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the interesting thing is when we won the Earthshot Prize, we were just on the edge of getting this product ready to manufacture at scale. And we had like dreamt of getting this into stadiums, but it's really hard. Like, there's just so many different parties involved, and it was really, really hard to understand the path to get there. And we had like the Earthshot Prize fellowship retreat in Windsor, and we had a little chat, and he was like, well, I mean, like, as a patron of the FA, I'm sure that I can like knock on a few doors. And he has, and so it's been amazing. I mean, like, he was really quick to call Aston Villa and say, hey, can we have this in Villa Park? Because this is the kind of like solution that eliminates a lot of plastic on each game day. And so that was fantastic because at that time we were starting to work with like Campus Group, Levy, the caterers who are kind of like doing all of the food service in those stadiums. And so that became the beginning of like one of our biggest partnerships, where they decided to roll out this solution to all of the stadiums that they operate in Europe. So now that's 50 stadiums, including Tottenham Hotspurs, Chelsea, the O2, Twickenham, Oval, Wimbledon. So that's great.
I suppose if you're getting a phone call from Prince William, they're not saying no.
Yeah. Now, you've obviously worked with the Royals for a long time now. Can I ask what moment has stood out for both of you? Tony, would you like to go first?
Well, there are many, but I think the opening address at the Paris Climate Summit by the then Prince Charles, I think that was quite a moment, because that was the breakthrough meeting that led the world to adopt that accord, which we're now working through to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050. We need to go quicker than that even, I think the science is telling us. But that was a key moment, and you really saw the coming together of all of these ideas and that thinking and that convening over decades, really landing at a global summit. So that for me was quite a moment, and the words that he shared there, I think you can find the video of his speech online if people want to look at it, but a heartfelt, very powerful call to action, which the world responded to with that treaty.
Pierre? I mean, you've said quite a few already, but...
I think, obviously, like, it's very intimidating the first time you get to kind of be in the room and then have a conversation with anyone from a royal family. And so there's this like first kind of expectation that it's all a bit of a front and they are just kind of like playing like this character. And actually, like, having now, I think, like, met him maybe like 10 times, like, what you see is what you get. He's exactly the way he comes across, kind of like on the telly. And so what was amazing is that he came to visit our kind of like seaweed labs in Hackney Wick. Everything was kind of like, by the minute, it was like a very like precise schedule, and he completely kind of like threw the schedule out, and he stayed an extra hour, and we ended up having pizza, and it was just like a really kind of like nice, normal human being that obviously like understands that he has an amazing platform and is using it, but he's also kind of like a genuinely nice person who gets it, who really kind of like pays attention. So it was like, that was really reassuring that like there is someone like that in that role with that platform. Yeah.
I can't believe he stayed an extra hour. The man really does love seaweed.
Well, I would have pizza, if I'm honest. Now, Tony, you've co-authored books with King Charles. How was that? Was it hard giving him notes?
He gave me the notes. So you got these two books on the table here, Harmony, which is a very substantial book, and also the one on climate change, which is a more slender volume. But they are both very much King Charles's thinking and ideas, and Harmony in particular is really a book which encapsulates his broad philosophy and really has some quite profound ideas in it around, for example, the extent to which we are collectively suffering from what he describes as a crisis of perception. And in Western societies, for the most part, we go along as though the earth is not really a material factor in our day-to-day lives. And this is why we have endless consumerism, an economy which has become detached from the reality of how our life support system works. We have developed ideas that really lead to very unsustainable outcomes, and they're completely embedded in the way we live. So the idea of a circular economy is still, despite great ideas that Pierre is taking forward, which gives us a real cause for hope, we still live in a really linear economy where we're taking resources and we're using them and then disposing of them. And then the book, Harmony, really builds links across all of these different things. And the King makes the point in the book about, people see me in the morning talking about rainforests, and then in the afternoon sustainable agriculture, and then tomorrow I'll be talking about architecture. In his mind, and very convincingly put in the book, these things are all expressed as different faces of the same problem, which really comes back to this crisis of perception. And so then the idea of building a circular economy with nature at its heart, developing ways of living which are mimicking nature, so circular ideas rather than linear ideas, reflecting the ways in which nature has no waste in it. Everything is reused, and to be able to build an economy that does that is the philosophy that's in that book. And I think this actually, for me, was one of the most important experiences in my thinking as an environmentalist, because that drew a lot of things together for me in a way that made total sense. And so people sometimes ask, what did you influence the king on with that book? And my point is it was completely the opposite direction. That's his book. And Ian Skelly and I helped him with bringing notes to put into text and to prose, and help with some of the picture sourcing and putting it into a form that led to it being a book. But every single syllable in there is his. And the same with the climate change book. This little book here, it's a ladybird book. That was my wife's idea, actually, to make a ladybird book, because he phoned me up and he said, this was just after the Paris summit, and he said, people have said to me that, we've got this great summit, but people don't really understand what's going on still. Can we do a small book? And I said, I'd be delighted to help you with that. And my wife said, well, why don't you do a ladybird book? Because that is the ultimate guide to, a subject which is on this short format, short text, pictures, and the pictures are very much in the old ladybird, 1960s and 70s kind of format. And we found an artist who could do those pictures. And again, every word in here, and the pictures too, he said, we need to change this and we need to make it like that. And it finished up being published in 2017, and I think was a great contribution. And actually, I think this is the first ladybird book that was subject to scientific peer review, as far as I know.
Oh, wow.
Because, this went through top experts in the climate world, who, again, checked every single little fact down to where the comma should be in a sentence in order to make sure it absolutely reflected the latest science. And he was very much wanting us to do this, to make sure we had a copper-bottomed treatise on climate change, but in a short format that everyone can read. And I think this book's been a great success. Again, that was his initiative, and again, came very much from him seeing the need for something that was an explanation of a complex subject in a short, quick format. You can read it in 20 minutes.
Can we pass the books around as well? That'd be
want us to
nice.
get up again?
I'll do it.
Sorry.
I don't want to lose my cards again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Pierre, the impact of the work you're doing with William and the Earthshot Prize is already remarkable. I heard him singing Notpla's praises at an Earthshot event just on Tuesday. What does it mean to have someone with his platform in your corner with something like this?
Well, I think the sad thing is, I think without the Earthshot Prize, we would really be struggling so much. It's a really tough market at the moment, with every kind of reason from politicians to kind of like every pressure is diverting the attention from the very important thing that is the source of it all, but that we are kind of not really solving properly. And so we need funding to have kind of a team of scientists to develop those kind of new materials. We need to have kind of all of those partnerships. We need to have awareness, and all of this is really hard to come by at the moment. And so having the convening power of the Earthshot Prize, that now in its 5th year is also really starting to stand for kind of the very best recognition of sustainable efforts, that opens so many doors. Often people say, it's amazing, you've won £1 million. And it sounds silly to say that, but the £1 million is the least valuable thing of the Earthshot Prize. The ability to get people to take 5 minutes extra to understand what you're talking about, to kind of accept to run a trial with a ton of seaweed on their very expensive machine and equipment, all of these things, you can't take them for granted. And so if the prince can be kind of the reason for someone to be a little bit excited, a little bit interested, it goes such a long way.
And he also is bringing other big names, and I don't just mean politicians, political figures, but he took the Oscar-winning actress Cate Blanchett to a factory in Norwich last week, which were words I never expected to write. But having these big names, is that helping to engage new generations, a new audience, do you think?
I think it's super important, and I think it's a very kind of smart move as well, because obviously there is supporting the Earthshot finalists who are doing these very important solutions and bringing them to scale. But on the other end, we need to inspire the next generation of people who today can choose to go in a career of working on climate solutions, on activism, on getting involved with like solving those problems. And I think you need that kind of like chance to reach them in the first place. And so that's the platform of the Royals. Like, they have the ability to get people who will never show up to London Climate Action Week, who will never kind of like click on a link for an article about sustainability, to actually hear about it. And who knows, like the second, third, fifth time that they hear about it, then they're going to start to have action. And I think that's very, very important. And so obviously, like, the Prince has that like big platform, but he's connecting with all these other people that bring people from all corners of society, because we need to solve it for everyone.
We do.
Tony, you've worked with both William and Charles. How similar is their approach, or how different is it?
Well, the amazing thing that the world should be very grateful for is this golden thread of activity and focus on these issues that goes back even a generation further, of course, to Prince Philip, who was also a great environmentalist, paying close attention to what was going on in the Royal Estates, working in the public realm as international president of WWF for a long time, for example, writing his own books about these subjects. That baton was handed on to the Prince of Wales, now King Charles, who has devoted many decades of activity to all of this, to great positive effect. And now Prince William has similarly picked up the cause, doing great work, as Pierre is describing, on these complicated big issues. And so this is hugely important, because these questions of climate change, of nature depletion, of the decline in resources, these are not going to be solved in a year or 2 years or even 5 years. They require long-term, sustained action. And so this handing forward of the message across generations could not be more important in terms of how we're going to be able to make the necessary impact on all of this. And so I think that is an additional dimension, is this intergenerational piece. In terms of King Charles and Prince William, the similarities, well, they're focused on very comparable questions, and I guess the big difference now is that they've changed roles. So Prince William has gone from being Duke of Cambridge to Prince of Wales, and Prince of Wales Prince Charles has now gone to be King Charles, and so the agenda has moved on. And so the longevity of all of this continues, and long may that last, because we've got a long way to go.
Next stop, Prince George.
Let's hope.
Obviously, Pierre, you were saying that what we see from Prince William is he is that person. He's described the need for urgency and optimism in his Earthshot prize. I was wondering, have you seen that from him firsthand?
He's incredibly
very impatient.
he's very demanding, and I think that like that's one of the strengths of forcing people to go as fast as is possible. I think the wonderful combination of like urgency and optimism is that it drives action. If you're all doom and gloom, everyone is kind of like stuck, and there's just kind of like paralysis. Whereas with this kind of like very solution-oriented, here are every kind of like every year 15 fantastic solutions. How do we support them to go to the maximum scale we can? And so he's also conscious that like this is a powerful platform. When he came to visit, he was like, invite the people that can change the game for you. They need to be in the room when I'm here, because we're going to make sure that they commit and that we go faster. So he's very much kind of like aware of the power that like him being in the room is having on people, to be like, oh, maybe I'm going to be like not just sitting on the sideline. Let's do this.
You say he's demanding, and we know he has said he's impatient. Tony, you've said we're living in the era of consequence. Do you think we are, and that is why action must happen now?
Yes. So it's interesting to reflect on the kind of recent period when there has been a strong focus on these subjects at the international level, and countries taking some level of action. But if you look at where we are and where we need to be, we're a very long distance. So in 1992, when the original climate change treaty was agreed, the carbon dioxide concentration in the Earth's atmosphere was about 380 parts per million. The carbon dioxide concentration last month, measured in Hawaii, was 430 parts per million. So it's gone up by 50 in the period since we adopted the global treaty that said it should be declining.
Wow.
And we're now in a period where we had last year, the global average temperature was more than 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial average. That's a critical threshold that was in the Paris Agreement. And on we go with still a lot of resistance to the kind of change that we need to make. And we're seeing increasing wildfires, drought. We're seeing the effects of extreme storms, and this is now impacting on infrastructure. It's causing loss of life, tragically, and it's leading to instability as a result of food security being undermined in some vulnerable countries. And this is then, in some cases, even spilling over into conflict. And so the consequences are already upon us. But I think the difficulty that we face in many circumstances is seeing the connections between what's going on in terms of the effects of a drought causing migration, leading to conflict between different groups of people, and the discussions that are going on about migration and immigration at the moment, obviously causing a lot of political controversy, but we're at the thin end of a very thick wedge if we carry on as we are. And so, this is not just an environmental set of questions we're dealing with here, it's questions of global stability and of security and of public health and well-being.
Now, you said you've witnessed decline. You say that before you used to see more bees, more newts, more hedgehogs. What has really shocked you recently that has stood out?
So the thing that really has troubled me over the last couple of years has been the virtual disappearance of the dawn chorus, where I live in Cambridge. I go to some other parts of the country and it's still pretty good, and that gives me a lot of hope and optimism. But where I live, there has been a disappearance of song thrushes, missel thrushes, blackbirds very depleted, other birds that normally would be part of that wonderful sound you get at the first daylight in the springtime. This year it's virtually silent. Wow. And this is quite troubling because I think it's revealing some changes which are really quite profound. The thing that I find almost as troubling as the loss of the bird song is the fact of me being one of very few people who's noticed, which I think really underlines this kind of crisis of perception that we're kind of drifting along, and most people aren't noticing the profound shifts that are taking place. And the thing I really worry about is my grandchildren, who have never known a world that has the wildlife that I saw as a child, and what they're now growing up with has become normal. And so over their lifetime, this is something that doesn't trouble them or doesn't touch them because they've never known what things used to be like. This is an idea called shifting baseline syndrome, where we get into an ever more depleted world, and as it depletes, successive generations are unaware of the change that's taken place because it is over a period of years and even decades. And so being able to communicate the depth of the challenge that we're in is really a critical part of the equation, and drawing those connections between the consequences of that and what it means for people. And actually, one very important voice on all of this, I think, in terms of the nature side of it and the extent to which nature nurtures the human spirit and promotes well-being and health, is the Princess of Wales, who, following her illness, has been very much talking about the power of nature for healing. And I think this is another way into this, which is not about facts and figures and how many birds have disappeared or how many fewer bees there are, but trying to make this a human thing, which is about how we feel and about our well-being, because everybody cares about that, even if you don't know the difference between a missel thrush and a song thrush, which I do.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, because she has that power to influence, as do other members of the family. And we have seen in recent years, the King switching to electric vehicles. At the Earthshot Prize, all the food served is vegetarian. The King's turned down the heating at the palace. I can personally attest to that. It gets a bit chilly there sometimes at briefings. What more do you think the royals could be doing to set an example?
So they do try very hard. Certainly when I worked quite closely with Prince Charles, he had people in his team who were looking at the carbon footprint over the course of the year, food very carefully sourced, trying to eliminate waste, the estates being used to promote nature outcomes. And actually one of the very exciting things that's going on at the moment that we're involved with at Natural England is the development of these large-scale nature recovery projects across the country. And actually that one you mentioned earlier, Emily, on Dartmoor. That's one of them, a big landscape recovery on West Dartmoor and the Duchy of Cornwall, very active in that. Another one is working in the landscape in northwest Norfolk around Sandringham. And the King has been a very strong advocate for bringing people together who are farming land in that part of England to be working together at landscape scale. And he's putting solar panels in at Sandringham as well to be contributing to the renewable energy mix. His famous old Aston Martin is running on waste agricultural products made into biofuel. So there is a strong, big attempt to be able to do this. I do remember one time on a visit in Romania, actually, where we on a visit with Prince of Wales at the time, now King Charles, to the place he goes to, which is the most wonderful place for nature in an unspoilt part of Romania, and him insisting that the people make sure we didn't waste any of the food from the previous evening and we'll have it this evening as well. And so those kind of little snippets where you can see real attention being paid to the details as well as to the big picture, and I think that does give a sense of inspiration that everyone can make a difference, even if you live in very different circumstances, which most of us do.
Perfect segue, actually, for everyone making a difference. I actually wanted to ask you both, what's something that we and everyone in the room could do right now that would make a change?
So one thing I often think, and it goes back to what I said a moment ago about shifting baselines and those kinds of perceptions that we all have. I think everyone knows, switch the lights off when you're not in a room, try to not use your car as much, and if you have one, get an electric one, all these kind of things. I think we all know that. Do the recycling, don't buy stuff you don't need. One thing I would say, which I think is really important, is if you have children or grandchildren or nephews and nieces, and if you don't have any of those, borrow someone else's children, and instead of going shopping, take them to a beautiful nature reserve and start getting them to connect with the animals and the plants, to identify some of them, and just to start feeling the power of nature at a very personal level. Because I think that's one of the things that in our increasingly urban, disconnected societies is the thing that we're really missing. It is really good for people to have that connection with nature, and when you have that connection, you care. And then when you care, you start to behave in a way which reflects these big questions. So I think that is a critical thing. Don't go shopping. Take the youngsters to a nature reserve.
Right, noted. And you, Pierre?
Yeah, I think often there is this feeling that we're just consumers and we can't really do anything, and the big businesses or the politicians are the ones who are in control. But actually being on the flip side, talking with lots of brands, it's actually crazy how just a handful of people who are not happy with the products that they've bought because it's got too much plastic or it's full of additives or whatever it is, and who actually take the 10 seconds to feed that back to the brand, to leave a comment on Instagram or write an email at info@ or whatever it is. People feel that has zero impact. It's quite the opposite. You've got 20 people who raise their voice about something, and it becomes a crisis in those companies. And then they're like, what are we going to do, and so on. And eventually they reach out to people who are developing solutions like us. And so I think the call to action is if you're not satisfied with what you're being given as an option, just say it to the brand, I love your brand, but I really hate that I have to throw away this piece of plastic every time I consume this product. And you would be surprised how quickly those are pulling into a pretty big problem internally for those companies. So I think that's one thing, and the same goes with our politicians. I write to my local MP to say, hey, how do we talk about those forever chemicals in Parliament? And luckily we have a great MP, and she's actually brought it up in Parliament. But we don't leverage those connections enough. Let's not forget that they're working for us.
I love that you said that, because I complain all the time when I'm recycling.
You surprised me,
says,
Andrea.
Well, no, because it says don't recycle at home. And I'm like, well, where am I going to recycle it? So I put it in the bin, and actually I should start sending emails. Yeah. I like a complaint, actually, so I might start doing that. I might start doing that tonight. What's one thing that gives both of you hope for the future?
For me, one of the things that is so powerful is, and you get to experience it in London Climate Action Week and so on, is actually the problem is huge. It's so broad, it feels impossible. But actually, you meet 1,000 people who are taking a slice of it, and they're going very deep, and they're doing things that you have no idea that this problem even existed. But there's an army of us, and I think every year the Earthshot Prize receives more than 1,000 nominations. So many people working like tirelessly for decades on very important problems, and we don't hear about them. They're doing this kind of like quite kind of like in the shadows, but like there is an army of us out there, and so that's a reason for optimism. Like we don't need to wait for kind of like policy to happen before this army actually works day in, day out to solve this.
It's amazing. How about you, Tony?
I think the thing that really gives me a sense of hope is the ability of nature to recover. If you give her a chance, she comes back. And I see this quite a lot in my work at Natural England, going to places where people are going through the bottom of the decline and starting to come up the other side towards recovery. And a lot of people in the farming business, in the minerals business, people with infrastructure projects, house builders, all beginning to see that if you give nature a chance, it can add a lot to what you're trying to achieve with your core business. And nature will do that if we give it a chance and help it. And so we've got more and more examples of this, actually. And that's the other thing which I think is a great source of hope, is people being able to see other people doing practical things that make a difference. And so this packaging, fantastic example. We don't have to have disposable plastic. We've got alternatives. And we don't have to have destructive farming, because there's a great example of people producing food and the nature is coming back. And we don't have to have houses bereft of green space, because people can design beautiful residential areas where you want to bring your children up with birdsong, butterflies, flowing water. All of these things are within our gift. And if we give nature a chance, it will give us everything that we need back in return.
What's next for you, Tony, other than I know you have another meeting in the city to
What's
continue.
next today, or what's next in life?
What's next? You just published another book, haven't
Yes.
you, Just Earth?
Yes.
Are there more books to come?
Yes, I am actually writing on a book which has a lot of optimism in it. It's called We're Back, and it's the story of species that went extinct in Britain but which are now returning. The beaver, the white-tailed eagle, the spoonbill, the crane, the large blue butterfly, the New Forest cicada, the pool frog, the lady slipper orchid. I've got about 20 species which between them tell a story of what's possible if we change our behavior in terms of chemical pollution, air pollution, changing the way we manage land, stop killing things. That's quite a good thing to help them recover.
Good bit of advice there. I'll take that with me, thank you.
Yes.
And you, Pierre, now you expanded into the United States recently as well. I mean, how big are your ambitions for NOPLA?
Yeah, I think, now that we've got a pretty good example of how we can make, even at the scale of London, I think now we have like all of the top sports and kind of like entertainment, music venues switching to NOPLA. I think we've eliminated about 6 million single-use plastics in London since we started. Let's take this to kind of like other cities. And so, excitingly, we've got the Portland Trailblazers, the first NBA stadium, kind of like jumping on NOPLA. But right now, we're working hard on like making sure we can make the manufacturing supply chain kind of like work locally. So we're finding partners who can actually kind of like put the seaweed on the board and kind of like form the boxes and so on in the US. And from there, let's grow it over in the US.
That's fantastic. Well, I think we need to wrap up now. I think. Can we come and speak to you afterwards?
Yeah.
Amber's given me the look.
Oh, yeah. I missed that, sorry. Well, I think it's time to officially say bye-bye then. A huge thank you to Tony, Pierre, and to you two, our very first live audience. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
You've all been amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.